We have some updates on some huge Supreme Court decisions and a few quick updates on war before we get into our social media reactions for the week. All that and more right now. This is episode 69 of the Republic Brothers podcast. He's Matt, I'm Mike, and today is July 1st. Please hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss our next episode on Monday. Well, we're going to kick the show off today with some major updates from the Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court struck down Donald Trump's executive order that sought to end automatic birthright citizenship. In a 6-3 decision in the case Trump versus Barbara, the court reaffirmed the long-standing interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Almost anyone born on American soil is automatically a U.S. citizen, regardless of their parents' legal status. On his first day back in office in January of 25, President Trump signed Executive Order 14160. It directed federal agencies to stop issuing birth certificates and passports to newborns unless at least one parent was a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. The policy targeted children born to undocumented immigrants as well as those on temporary visas, such as students or foreign guest workers. The administration's legal argument hinged on a narrow reading of the 14th Amendment's text, which grants citizenship to those born in the U.S. and, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Government lawyers argued that jurisdiction required a permanent political allegiance to the country, meaning children of temporary or unauthorized visitors should not qualify. While the final vote to strike down the executive order was 6-3, the legal reasoning among the justices was more nuanced. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the primary opinion, joined by Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the court's 3 liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. They ruled that the executive order flatly violated the 14th Amendment. Roberts noted that the framers of the amendment intended it to be a broad territorial promise upholding the landmark 1898 precedent U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. Justice Brett Kavanaugh provided the crucial 6th vote to block the policy, but he disagreed on the constitutional question. He argued that the executive order was invalid because it violated existing federal immigration laws passed by Congress rather than violating the Constitution itself. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch voted to uphold the president's order. In his dissent, Alito argued that the majority's broad interpretation creates a powerful incentive for illegal immigration and misinterprets historical intent. So what happens next? Because the executive order had already been blocked by lower federal courts, it never actually went into effect. The Supreme Court's ruling permanently puts it to rest. However, because Justice Kavanaugh based his vote on federal statutes rather than the Constitution, the door was left slightly open for a legislative battle. President Trump acknowledged the ruling on Truth Social, calling it too bad for our country, but immediately urging Congress to bypass the need for a constitutional amendment and pass a law to end birthright citizenship instead. Personally, I don't think that you should be a citizen just because you were born here. I agree with President Trump on this one. I think at least one of your parents needs to be a citizen. Just like Samuel Alito argued, this incentivizes illegal immigrants to sneak into our country and have kids here. We keep coming back to this, but everyone says that this is such a terrible place to be, yet people are trying to sneak into our country and have their kids here so they'll be citizens. Why would they go through all that if this is such a bad place?
Well, this law was left intentionally ambiguous. The main purpose of birthright citizenship was to ensure the children of slaves were Americans. That was a good thing. They should have been. These were human beings who did not choose to be slaves, and their children should receive the same rights as all other humans, even though we can both probably admit we didn't live up to that standard at the time. The times have changed, though. The downside to birthright citizenship is that it does encourage illegal immigration. People in foreign countries will know this and try to have the baby born in the U.S. to give them a better life. Then the left will, of course, complain that Trump is separating families. The argument Trump and his team make is that the mother never should have been here in the first place, and that child may grow up with an allegiance to a foreign nation, like the one his mother or father came from. That is a real thing, by the way. We already know 20% of Somalia's GDP came from people living in the U.S. who sent money back to family members. Trump is America first, and he wants that money to be spent in the U.S. on people who are here legally. I personally wasn't surprised by the ruling from the Supreme Court, but it was a disappointment. and it is in our best interest not to encourage illegal immigration. Everyone around the world knows what will happen at a given time if they enter the U.S. illegally, which is why you saw millions upon millions of illegal immigrants flowing into the country when Biden was the president.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Now, issued on the same day as the birthright citizenship ruling, the Supreme Court delivered a decision on transgender athletes in school and college sports. In a 6-3 ruling, the court's conservative majority upheld state laws that bar transgender girls and women from competing on female athletic teams. The decision consolidated challenges against laws in Idaho and West Virginia, which mandate that public school and collegiate sports teams be designated strictly by biological sex. The plaintiffs, including a high school track athlete from West Virginia and a student at Boise State University, argued that these bans violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and Title IX, the federal law prohibiting sex-based discrimination in education. Writing for the majority, Justice Brett Kavanaugh stated that the plain, ordinary meaning of sex when Title IX was passed in 1972 refers to explicitly biological sex, not gender identity, particularly when it comes to competitive sports. The majority ruled that separate sports teams based on biological sex are entirely reasonable. Kavanaugh wrote that due to inherent physical differences, limiting teams to biological females is a valid way to reduce the risk of injury and protect fair competition. The opinion emphasized that sports are inherently competitive and roster spots are limited. Allowing biological males to compete on female teams, Kavanaugh noted, inherently displaces or disadvantages female athletes. The court ruled that local school districts and state legislators, rather than federal judges, are the appropriate bodies to weigh medical and scientific considerations when drawing athletic eligibility lines. While all 6 conservative justices voted to uphold the state bans, the 3 liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, split their reasoning. Interestingly, the liberal justices agreed with the majority on the statutory Title IX question, acknowledging that the text does not explicitly force schools to create exceptions for transgender women. However, they strongly dissented on the constitutional equal protection issue. In a dissent from the bench, Justice Sonia Sotomayor argued that the majority's ruling was overly broad and ignored the unique circumstances of athletes who transitioned before puberty, thereby denying them the immense social and developmental benefits of student athletics. The ruling does not create a nationwide ban on transgender athletes. Instead, it leaves the decision entirely up to individual states and local athletic associations. In conservative states, the decision provides rock-solid legal backing to the roughly 29 states that already have restrictions or total bans on the books. In liberal states like New York, California, and Connecticut, which explicitly protect the right of transgender athletes to play on teams matching their gender identity, those states are unaffected by this ruling and can keep their current policies in place. President Trump heavily praised the decision on Truth Social, calling it a big win that takes a ridiculous situation off the table. I think it's pretty self-explanatory which side of the fence we fall on this one. Men do not belong in women's sports, ever. We've talked about this so many times. We've given countless examples of why it should not be that hard to comprehend this decision.
You would think having men in women's sports would be unacceptable for liberals, but apparently not. The party that says trust the science can't wrap their heads around the idea that there are only 2 sexes. Men across the board have far more muscle mass and strength on average, and it's an even larger gap if you only look at upper body strength. Men have bigger fast-twitch muscle size, which means they are faster. Longer limbs also means greater stride distances. Larger hearts and lungs also means oxygen delivery during activities is higher, which means better endurance on average. Men also have larger skeletons and higher bone density, which means men are more resistant to fractures and can withstand larger weights. Women are more flexible because of all these things, but you can see why it is unfair, especially in things like combat sports. Fallon Fox is probably the worst example because his opponents in MMA didn't even know the person they signed up to fight was actually a man. He beat the crap out of those women, too. Not on skill or training, but on pure strength and power. How about Iman Khalif, who we haven't heard much of lately? Khalif won Olympic gold in boxing just a couple years ago. There's a ton of controversy there because he failed a sex test in 2023 to compete in a women's boxing event, but the IOC said that test was, quote, abrupt and arbitrary, and let him box in the Olympics. He won gold. Then they changed their minds and said sex tests are necessary, but Khalif hasn't taken part in any event since. There's a big soccer tournament going on right now. Carly Lloyd, who's covering it, confirmed the U.S. women's soccer team lost 5-2 to the U15 Dallas FC program. 15-year-old boys beat the best women's team in the world. Think that was a one-off? No. A 15U team in the UK beat Australia's women's team, who at the time was the number 5 ranked team in the world, 7-0. The U.S. women's hockey team lost to the Warroad High School once. That town has 2,000 people and 500 high school students in it today.
Yeah, there's a ton of examples we've talked about over the years of this stuff. You also had that bodybuilding one, I think, a couple months ago. Someone who's been at the front of this fight is Riley Gaines. Here's what she had to say after the decision.
I feel absolutely vindicated. I feel, of course, excited. I feel optimistic about the future. But I think the feeling that I feel the most of is vindicated, right? I think not just myself, but most people, especially those with large platforms who have taken the stance that Michaela and Jen and myself have taken over the years, we have been the target of some pretty horrific campaigns. Whether it's totally false, right? The crazy headlines, the criticism and the pressure, the negativity that comes with it. I will say, even the things Simone said about me and saying that I look like a man and the body shaming tactics, I feel vindicated today. And I'm with Michaela. Let this be a clarion call, not just to Simone, but to every, I think especially elite female athlete, professional female athlete, the likes of Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, et cetera, Serena Williams, to link arms, because this is a really big decision that has lasting impact, not just for our generation, for the things that people like me and certainly Michaela and even Simone have accomplished, but for little girls like my daughter.
Riley Gaines is taller than average for a woman, and she's very athletic, but she was no match for a 6'4" dude. She should absolutely feel vindicated. It was always funny to me, though, to hear Simone Biles, or even people like Megan Rapinoe, say trans people should be allowed to compete in women's sports. Let that happen when they are competing, and I have a feeling they would feel a little different. They aren't winning gold if there are men competing with them.
Yeah, I agree with her, and she should definitely feel vindicated.
Let's not forget Zuby, the rapper who became a woman for 5 minutes, broke the women's weightlifting world record, and then switched back just to prove a point.
Yeah. The amount of hate she got is kind of crazy, considering the people on the other side are supposed to be the kind and understanding community. But just like their gender, their personalities are a lie too.
Yeah, you're totally right. And that brings us to our next topic. Over the last few days, the biggest development surrounding Iran has actually been the lack of a major development. Despite continued diplomatic activity behind the scenes, there have been no high-level face-to-face talks between senior U.S. and Iranian officials, and that's becoming one of the biggest stories itself. Negotiators have remained in contact through intermediaries, primarily in Qatar, but the discussions have been indirect. Iranian officials have made it clear they are not prepared to meet directly with senior American envoys at this stage, and that has significantly lowered expectations for any immediate breakthrough. Instead of tackling the biggest issues like Iran's nuclear program, uranium enrichment, or long-term sanctions relief, the recent discussions have focused on much narrower topics. Much of the attention has been on maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz, commercial shipping, and the implementation of previously discussed confidence-building measures. The core disputes that sparked the crisis remain largely untouched. From Washington's perspective, officials continue to say diplomacy remains the preferred path. At the same time, they've also stressed that military options remain available if negotiations collapse. That balancing act, keeping pressure on Iran while leaving the door open to diplomacy, hasn't changed much over the last couple weeks. For Iran, the message has also been consistent. Tehran insists it will continue negotiating through mediators for now, while maintaining that any broader agreement would require recognition of its interests and security concerns. Iranian leaders have shown little indication that they're ready to shift their negotiating position simply because talks have resumed. Meanwhile, global markets appear to be interpreting the lack of escalation as cautiously positive. Oil prices have eased from the highs seen during the height of the conflict, although shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains below normal and concerns about regional security haven't disappeared. Any renewed military incident could quickly reverse that optimism. So where does that leave things today? Essentially a holding pattern. Communication channels remain open, but the people with the authority to make the biggest decisions aren't sitting across the table from each other. There are no reports of an imminent summit, no announced timetable for high-level negotiations, and no indication that the toughest issues are close to being resolved. For now, the strategy appears to be managing tensions rather than solving them. Both sides seem intent on avoiding another rapid military escalation, but neither side appears ready to make the concessions necessary for a comprehensive peace agreement. Until those high-level talks actually happen, the situation is likely to remain one of cautious diplomacy. It's clear there is mistrust by both sides, and that to me makes me think we are no closer to actually ending this than we were 2 months ago.
Yeah, I said that on the last episode, that I didn't think that we were even close to the end. Until those talks actually happen, the situation is going to remain basically uncertain. So let's shift gears now and go on to another major global flashpoint. Let's get a quick update on the war between Ukraine and Russia before we move on to the feed for this week.
The war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine remains one of attrition, and over the past several days, we have seen both sides continue to escalate their use of drones and long-range strikes. Ukraine has continued targeting military and energy infrastructure deep inside Russia, including oil facilities and logistics hubs. President Volodymyr Zelensky says these attacks are designed to weaken Russia's ability to sustain its offensive and force Moscow to divert valuable air defense resources away from the front lines. Meanwhile, the heaviest fighting remains concentrated in eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donetsk region. Russia is still making slow, incremental advances, but military analysts say those gains are coming at an extremely high cost. Rather than launching large armored assaults, Russian forces increasingly rely on small infantry groups, motorcycles, and constant drone support in an effort to reduce losses. One report that's received significant attention this week involves the survival rate of Russian assault troops. Several Russian pro-war military bloggers have claimed that soldiers sent into some of the most dangerous sectors survive an average of just 20 minutes after reaching the front lines. The reports also indicate that from the time of signing the contract to join the military to the time of death is an average of just 2 weeks for Russia's infantry. That figure has been widely reported, but it has not been independently verified, so treat it with some caution. Even so, it reflects the extraordinary danger of today's battlefield, where drones are constantly hunting troops and vehicles, as well as stalking the supply lines that provide them the stuff they need. Ukraine says drones now account for a large share of Russian battlefield losses, while Russia continues launching nightly drone and missile attacks against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Increasingly, both sides are relying on inexpensive unmanned systems rather than traditional large-scale offensives, and some reports say 90% of Russian casualties are the result of unmanned systems. Away from the battlefield, Ukraine's long-range strikes continue to pressure Russia's energy sector and logistics network, forcing Moscow to dedicate more resources to defending targets far from the front. At the same time, there are growing signs that the economic burden of the war is putting additional pressure on Russia, even as the Kremlin shows no indication of changing its military strategy. For now, the picture is clear. Russia continues to push forward at a very high cost. Ukraine continues expanding its ability to strike deep inside Russia, and the war is increasingly being defined not by tanks or fighter jets, but by drones.
All right, well, obviously we will keep an eye on that and Iran. Let's move on to our last thing here. Of course, everyone, it is time for The Feed. This is the segment where we take all the funny videos we saw on our social media feeds this week, and we break them down one by one. Our first clip comes from Rob Schneider.
The old expression is, if you're not a liberal in your 20s, you're heartless. But if you're still a liberal in your 50s, you're an idiot. I mean that in a general sense. And in an actual sense, somebody has to pay for some of this stuff. And the idea that we can just pass the buck, if somebody's paying this, it is a reallocation of wealth. Someone has to pay for it. So who?
That is spot on and hilarious. I think that's pretty much how it goes for most people, though. When you're young and you don't own anything, you're okay with taking other people's money. But when you grow up and you get your own money, suddenly you don't want other people's hands in your pocket. That's when you become a Republican.
Yeah, spot on. The average person hits their peak earnings in their 50s. When you are in your 20s, you are struggling compared to your parents and grandparents. That is normal. It was the case for your parents and grandparents as well, but you didn't see that. The liberal way is to be compassionate, but that doesn't factor in how the world actually works.
Yeah, exactly. All right, here is clip number 2.
How many trans-identified people of any race do you think were murdered in Chicago or anywhere else in the state of Illinois in the entire year of 2025? I mean, this is a genocide, remember? A state of emergency. The mayor has made a task force to deal with it. Well, as it happens, after looking into it, the answer is 0. 0 trans-identified people were murdered in the city of Chicago or anywhere else in the state in 2025. Yes, the city of Chicago has declared a state of emergency over a genocide of so-called trans people in which 0 of those people were murdered. So this is the first genocide in history to kill 0 people. Of all the genocides that have actually happened in history, if you have to choose one to be the target of, like, this is the best one you could hope for. Like, I'll take the genocide where nobody is killed. I'll take that one.
This is basically the city of Chicago trying to muster up some good old-fashioned propaganda. They tell everyone that it's a huge problem, knowing that the liberals won't actually look it up.
You're saying no fact-checking on this story?
Exactly.
Trans people dying is like a plane crash. They happen so rarely that you hear about it when it happens. Of course, planes don't have mental illness. The leading cause of death in the trans community is suicide. So that's a big difference. The plane didn't want to off itself.
Yeah, I found this whole thing hilarious. What's even funnier, though, is this next one. Here's clip number 3 from Brandon Gill.
Taxpayers' money should be utilized to ensure that individuals have access to the food that they need to survive or may be accessible to them.
Do they need sugary sodas to survive?
Some of them do, who do have low blood issues, who may
Is that
have
right?
COVID, or who have kidney issues.
You think
Yes,
they
there's-
need Coca-Cola to survive? Do you think that's the most appropriate use of our tax dollars?
I am not a physician, but medical records and expertise
You were
do
just
show that in
citing
some
the
circumstances
health
they do.
needs, apparently, of the American people. So do the American people need Coca-Cola to survive?
I did not say that. I said that
I'm asking you. I'm giving you the opportunity to say yes or no.
I will not answer for individuals and their choices.
You think that there are some Americans who need Coca-Cola to survive? Is that your testimony?
I am happy to talk about the food and
You
nutrition
just don't
needs
know?
that individuals have.
You just don't know. I think most people can rationally say that you don't need Coca-Cola to survive.
Well, Mr. Brandon Gill, liberals can't rationally say anything, or their entire belief system would crumble. Everything they argue about never comes from a place of rationality. We just saw that in the last clip. Trans people are being killed all over the place, except they aren't.
But Michael, you're supposed to believe the science. She did say one thing that was right, and she said it was an individual thing. But nobody on Earth needs Coke to survive. The amount of sugar in one can of Coke is ridiculous, and that's bad for everyone. There might be a few people who need to add sugar to their diets, but that is not the case for more than 99% of people.
And they don't need the sugar from a Coca-Cola.
Not to mention, one can of Coca-Cola is like 10 or 11 teaspoons of sugar.
Yeah, it's a lot. All right, well, here's our last clip. Since we have the World Cup going on, here's a funny clip about soccer in America.
Look, we made the World Cup. That's better than a lot of other countries. We need to assert ourselves in soccer. We need to start getting these youth programs in certain neighborhoods where great athletes tend to emerge. That's what it is, yeah. I don't know where those neighborhoods are. Yeah, but just look at the crime rate and put them there. Put them there. You know, would it kill Mom down anybody just put some grass in these project buildings? Can you just put down some grass? Or why don't you just go to the basketball courts and say, hey, guys, why don't you try using your feet? Could you do that?
That's really not a terrible idea. If we want to be a little bit more competitive in soccer internationally, we have to find a way to get our best athletes to play it. And right now, our best athletes aren't playing soccer.
Very true. Maybe tell them Lionel Messi made nearly $800 million in his last 4 years at Barcelona. Tell them Cristiano Ronaldo right now makes $75 million a year to play 30 matches in front of less than 8,000 people. Money talks, and that is the case in every community. Everyone will follow the money. Just have to show them that and try and build a dominant league in the U.S. to keep them here as well.
Yeah. While we're recording this, too, the U.S. team is playing.
We're up 1-0.
Currently up 1-0. So hopefully that stays. But that is it for episode 69 of the Republic Brothers podcast. Before you click away, please hit the subscribe or follow button. New episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.